thank you very much for coming and attending this session. And I love, Erin, that you started with gratitude and curiosity. And I'm really grateful to be here today. And I'm really curious about what the conversations are going to be like. But having spoken to the panel already, I'm really excited about what we're going to discuss today. So firstly, I'll introduce myself. My name is Eugenie Regan. I am Vice President of Research Solutions at Springer Nature, and within Research Solutions, we're not the core part of publishing within Springer Nature, but rather solutions focused on researchers such as training or language editing or preprint, so they sit within my division. But my background is I'm Irish. I have a PhD in ecology. I don't know, Annabelle's from Ireland as well. In terms of disappearing wetlands is my area of expertise. I'm a biodiversity researcher, and entomology is my specific area. And I have published over 50 peer-reviewed papers, including in Nature and Science, which is really exciting, and 2 books. And my recent career took me to work in international biodiversity conservation and working for the UN. And in that role, I did quite a, we published during that time, so it's kind of as a researcher, but then working in policy mainly. And then my career took a turn where I had the opportunity to join Springer Nature and really bring that researcher perspective to Springer Nature, and that's what really made me want to join and say, actually, I don't know, publishing a journal article, I would rather pull a nail out. I don't know if anyone else has the same experience. And then peer review as well, it's like, sigh. And when am I going to get this done? And I thought, okay, we can do way better, right? We can do way, way better. And being an early career researcher, my experience, it was incredibly lonely. I had very little support. I hadn't a clue what I was doing. And my PhD took a long, winding, difficult turns at times, So I was like, okay, we can really make a difference here, and so I'm quite excited. Particularly, my passion is around early career researchers, so that's why I'm delighted to be here today. So our session is on digital natives within publishing, and what I would like the panelists to do is introduce themselves. We could start with Audrey, and if you could say, introduce yourself and your background, what you're doing at the moment, and then also what I would like each panelist is, what is your definition of a digital native?
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Audrey, and I'm currently doing my PhD at the University of Oxford, and my area of research is cellular neuroscience. I'm looking at the role of cell stress in the regulation of sleep. So I'm actually in the later stages of my PhD at the moment and should be thinking about writing my thesis soon. But I'm on the BBSRC-funded doctoral training program, so that allowed me a year to kind of explore what research I'm interested in and then choose a project to kind of embark on. And the project I happened to go on to was, my supervisors had just got a grant for it, so I was the only PhD student working on that project. I am, in fact. So it's been, like you said, Eugenie, it's been a sort of long and quite kind of laying the foundations of a project which can be quite lonely and hard work. And even, after 3 years of the project, it's not at a point where it's finished. So yeah, I've had a sort of mixed experience during my research career so far. But I've always been interested in research. I did my undergrad at Cambridge doing natural sciences, and all my summers I would spend kind of doing research internships, and the other thing I love doing is communicating science to general audiences. So I've always loved writing about science, talking to people about science, and actually in Oxford I've become more involved in multimedia forms of communicating science. So I've kind of gone into video making and podcasting. So yeah, as a student, there's so many avenues open to me, which I'm glad I've had a chance to explore. And also, while at Oxford, I realized that the early career researcher scene is, it's quite harsh for people from underrepresented groups. So me and a few friends, we kind of saw that there was a need for, like Erin mentioned, mentorship of early career researchers coming in from different backgrounds. So we started up a network called the BIPOC STEM Network, which is, looking to kind of really support and nurture an inclusive research environment for us kind of early career researchers. So that's a bit about my background. And so I guess I definitely identify as a digital native because I grew up around technology, and I got my first phone when I was 8. It was a Nokia brick phone. I got my first smartphone probably a bit later than my friends, around 14, and my first laptop when I was 15, which was, it was like, my parents were like, you need this, otherwise you will not pass your GCSEs. So it was a necessity at that point. And I'd say ever since then, I've seen technology as like an extension to myself and my life, and I'm happy to integrate it into my everyday life and in everything I do. So I would define a digital native not necessarily by age or generation, but by the mindset and the openness to kind of naturally integrate technologies into different aspects of your life, if that makes any sense.
It does. Thanks, Audrey. Yeah. Jess.
Hi, good morning. So my name is Jess Pancioli. I am slightly in awe of all the things that Audrey is doing. So I don't know that my story is going to be as interesting. So I'm going to say that I consider myself to be a very early digital native. So I grew up with dial-up internet. So I, have been at that point where we just had the one family computer till I probably went to uni at 18. So my background is in organic chemistry, specifically organic supramolecular chemistry, if any of you are chemists out there in the audience. I did my degree and my PhD at Queen Mary University of London. So that was 8 years of my life spent in East London, which was great. And I really enjoyed my PhD, in all honesty. It was the best thing I could ever have done. Just independence, curiosity, learning is something that I want to continually do forever. And I loved it so much. It was just such a stimulating time for me. Didn't enjoy writing a thesis, but who does? And then went on to do a 18-month postdoc in sort of medicinal chemistry at University College London, which is just down the road. And then I went to Oxford for nearly 4 years, back to supramolecular chemistry to be a sort of senior postdoc in a lab. So I've been through the full gamut of research from start to finish, and I've seen how researchers have changed their methods in real time because I had to do it. I had to change my methods for finding papers. I did go to the library and look for actual physical copies of papers. And then by the end of everything, everything's online. Even like the feed readers that I used to use to try and collate all of my research and all the things I wanted to read, like those feed readers then became obsolete like halfway through my PhD. So it was like, I need to find something else to try and collate all of my research and all the papers that I want to read. So I feel like I've seen things change in real time, and now I'm on the other side of the coin. So about 18 months ago, I joined Elsevier as a scientific editor to launch a brand new open access organic chemistry journal. And that's been really great because I've been able to take all of my expertise and all of the bugbears that I had as a researcher and things I wanted for a journal and things I wanted to read and how I wanted to see chemistry, and really strive to sort of bring that to publishing now in terms of making things accessible. It's an open access journal, which I'm really passionate about, and it's all online. So obviously, I'm sort of once again living sort of digital real-time research, and trying to sort of adapt and work with it and make things better for everyone. So I'm really passionate about it being open access, about science being open access, and just accessibility for all groups, not just socio-economically, but geographically as well. And I guess hopefully I'm here to bring a sort of different perspective on how things have changed and what I think's coming in the future. Hopefully that's.
And Jess, what's your definition of a digital native?
This is a hard one. I'm going to agree with Audrey and say that I think it's not an age thing, it's a mindset thing for certain. like I said, I consider myself to be very early in the digital native space. It's kind of being, it's not just about being technology literate, it's about how you use it. And like you said, it becomes an extension of yourself, right? It's not just using your smartphone to talk to people. It's about the fact that you can use it to access things that you want to read, and there's everything that you're looking for out of your research and your job, and the things that you want are at your fingertips, and you can access them easily and without thinking about it. To me, that's a digital native. It's innate and it's natural, and it just comes to you without you having to consider, how do I look this up, or what resources do I need for this? It's just like an innate, natural thing that it becomes an extension of yourself. So to me, that's what a digital native is.
Thanks, Jess. Okay. Annabelle?
Hi everybody, good morning. My name is Annabelle Walkwari, and I'm from Ireland, and I'm a final year PhD student. My background is in medical physics, but my PhD is in bioinformatics, and I'm a computational PhD student, so I'm not in the lab, so I'm basically based around technology. I always have been. My PhD focuses on a particular type of colorectal cancer, and my overall aim is to predict new therapy responses in this cancer. And what I do is I sit on my computer every single day. So when COVID happened, it was amazing because I could work at home, and I just felt very comfortable. So as you all said, doing a PhD can be quite lonely, but for me, that's amazing. So basically, I predict therapy responses in colorectal cancer. So I basically analyze and collect patient data, and I, over time, come up with new responses. So as well as this, I have been documenting my PhD online. I'm a science communicator. I love sharing ways for people to understand what I'm doing, despite them not being in the field. I think it's very important as a scientist to be able to explain what you're doing to everybody. So open access is a massive thing I'm passionate about as well, and I feel like documenting my PhD journey, showing that it is an amazing time of my life. I find it a great experience, like you both said. Prior to starting my PhD, I never saw anybody who said I had a great experience, and I wanted to be that person to motivate and inspire other people to do so, because not every day is it difficult. It's a great learning experience, and I have taken so much from it. So digital native, I would definitely identify myself as one. Everything I do is based around technology, but I had the Nokia phone growing up. I had the computer growing up. I never felt like I needed to learn anything. Everything is always based around tech. How would I the question was,
what's your definition?
Yeah, what's my definition? I would say it has to be in the mindset. It's natural. I don't need to think about, like what you said, think about learning something. Like, for example, research papers. I use apps now to find research papers, like or Discovery or Scholarly. I've never gone into the library looking for a journal or a paper. It's at my hand, and as you said, if you are interested in wanting to learn, everything is at your fingertips. So it's in your mindset. So if you really wanted to become one, I definitely think that.
Thanks, Annabelle. Thank you. And Shan?
Hello everyone. My name is Shan. So I'm actually also a PhD student at the University of Oxford. Audrey and actually in the same lab. So yes, but I'm currently also actually meant to be my final year of my PhD. So I really should be writing my thesis right now, but it's a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm researching kind of sleep, but in relation to hibernation. But the reason I'm interested in this research area is because I'm really interested in how we can improve the way science is performed. So I'm trying to identify ways in which we can improve the animal models we use within research and trying to look for confounding factors. So we've been hypothesizing that actually mice are a hibernating species, and is this disrupting their sleep and then subsequently disrupting their behavior, which we aren't accounting for when we are designing experiments and we don't have appropriate controls. So I'm very passionate about good science, but also how that can be communicated as well. I've been very fortunate in that over the course of my PhD, I've had a lot of opportunities to go and talk about my research, both at conferences but also to lay audiences. I've been quite involved in scientific outreach, so going into schools and talking about my research, and also trying to encourage younger students who maybe feel like science isn't accessible to them at higher levels to pursue it. Because I've definitely noticed, so I was first person in my family to go to university, have definitely noticed a kind of disconnect in how people view science versus how I view science. So I really enjoy learning. I love being exploring different areas of science, whereas my family definitely find it quite like a scary concept. They feel like it's not for them, that they're not going to understand. And I think as well a lot of the way we communicate science definitely needs to address this as well. And I think to some extent publishing needs to take it into account as well, that really science should be accessible for everyone. And it shouldn't be this really big scary thing that people feel like they need to be an expert in to understand and to read. So that's what I'm currently doing. I previously studied at the University of Manchester doing pharmacology, but yeah, now I've transitioned more to the neuroscience side. And I suppose my definition of a digital native, I guess it would be, for me, in my own experience, is if I ever have a question or I want to look up something, my first instinct is to look online, and I know quite innately how to do that, so very similar to what other people have said. But also, if I don't know how to do something, you kind of are literate to the extent of you can kind of figure out how to do it. Like whenever I go home to see my parents, they always have a long list of technology questions that I need to sort out for them, and quite often I don't actually know how to do it at the moment, but I have interacted with technology for pretty much my entire life at this point, that I know how to work it out. So I think it is a very teachable skill, but I think often younger, early career researchers, or to say younger people, because we have grown up alongside the technology as it develops, we've had this kind of learning process as also the technology's developed. So definitely it can feel a bit alien to maybe people who haven't had that experience, but I think it's definitely something that can be learned.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, really interesting. I love your definitions of digital native as well. So we were chatting as a panel previously, and one of the key areas that came up is equality. We did not design an all-female panel with a female moderator, and Amy and Erin were the ones who were coordinating this as well. So an all-female team, which is highly unusual, and it just happens to work out this way. But quite interesting, because we want to talk a bit about equality and what that means, I suppose, from digital technology, digital natives perspective. Don't know who wants to jump in first.
I guess I'll go. I think that this is going to be one of the big problems or issues to tackle in the future, in terms of, we're quite fortunate that we've grown up in a country that has ready access to all of these things. The thought of one of us having a smartphone, not having a smartphone even, is alien almost at this point in time. But there are so many other sort of countries, geographic locations, particularly places like the global south, where there's a huge need and a desire to be able to access the bare minimum basics of technology to become digital natives in and of themselves. There's a whole generations growing up in these places that strive to do research, that strive to be educated in a certain way, and they just don't have the bare minimum access of infrastructure to be even put internet in place for these things. So that we're the world is missing out on these new perspectives in science and new perspectives in education from places that it's just inaccessible. And I think that this is one of the big things that we need to tackle massively, in terms of reaching out to everyone to ensure that digital nativeness, or however we want to call it, is truly global, because it needs to be. I think it's so important if we're advancing science as a whole throughout the world. We want to place it at the forefront of people's minds as a value that is held in such high regard. It truly needs to be global, and I think that's my viewpoint on this.
And what are we missing because we're missing out on research from the Global South, for example? My background in the UN, when we were doing, I pulled together the 4th Global Biodiversity Outlook report and pulling together all the information on how biodiversity is faring across the world, and missing a load of information, just basic information about the Global South. And there was a piece published a while ago that said, who are the top 100 climate scientists in the world? I think there was 2 from Africa, from that continent. And when climate change affects the Global South much more than it does North, we're missing out on a huge amount of research that's a massive gap. So I completely agree. And then the other thing within my division is language. So if English isn't your first language, the internet is it's English by default, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I see this particularly for my data sets that I'm working with. A lot of the open source cancer data sets come from European countries, whereas one particular study that I'm focusing on looks at black and white patients who have a particular type of cancer, and the data for these black patients is basically next to nothing compared to white patients. My particular study has 60 black patients in comparison to over thousands of white, and to even have that comparison, your results can't be reproduced, and how can we move forward if we can't even reproduce our data with comparing data sets? So open source data sets have to be looked at. They have to be done in other countries other than Europe, because then when we try to publish our findings, the journal comes back and says, you need to reproduce these, you need to do this on other data sets, but it's like, where are these data sets? It's so difficult.
They just don't exist.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think the ecosystem kind of content at the moment is very much moving towards the digital sphere. It's very much online, which I think has a lot of benefits because you can so easily access so many articles, but at the same time that makes us very reliant, as we said, on being able to access those resources in the first place. So I think as well, when we went into one of the first COVID lockdowns in the UK, it became a very big issue that not everyone has stable internet access, which if you are a researcher and you're wanting to write papers, you need to often be able to either go physically to access journals, which wasn't an option during this time, and also those just aren't really as used anymore, having a physical space to store journals. It's just not many people. I've never done that. I've always accessed my content online. So then you're very reliant on being able to use the internet, and also if you're trying to then access journals as well, depending on which university you might be affiliated with, or if you're affiliated with the university at all, you might then not be able to access quite a lot of relevant articles. And again, it's what are we missing? We then can't. You might find what looks to be a very relevant paper. You read the abstract and then I can't access it. My university doesn't have a subscription to this, and then you just have to completely dismiss it. So so then you could be missing this really important finding or discussion point for your paper, or whatever it is that your work or your experimental design, and you just almost have to disregard it. And that seems to kind of limit the way we can take science going forwards.
Do you want to pick up on any of these points, Audrey?
Well, yeah, I was just kind of thinking about what Jess was saying about sort of geographical disparities and even access to basic infrastructure. And I think publishing is kind of going down the digital revolution route, which is great for all the researchers that have all the basic needs met. Mm-hmm. But we also need to keep in mind the non-digital natives in, areas of the world that haven't had access to the technology growing up. Mm-hmm. And we need to keep them on board as we kind of modernize the system as well. We need to talk to them. We need to hear their ideas as well. So I think get-togethers and conferences like these are very important to hear all sorts of diverse views and perspectives.
I think also one of you mentioned it, that we're streaming. We're now recording all the sessions and conferences, which means it's accessible. Mm. If you can't travel, you don't have the money to travel to the conferences, at least you can have access through recordings, for example. Mm. Yeah. So it really is an area that needs to be kept to the forefront of what we're doing. You mentioned those couple of people picking up on consuming content. So, the quality aspects of it, but in general, consuming content with digital natives, how it's changed completely over the past couple of decades. And I feel really old when I think about my PhD and all the papers and the filing cabinets and pulling it all out. But yeah, I don't know, do you want to, Shan, pick up on how it's changed?
Yeah, there definitely has been a big transition, because as I kind of mentioned earlier, I've never been to like a physical library to like go through and physically look at journals. It's always been finding the content online. And I even remember when I was doing my undergraduate degree, having entire training modules dedicated to how do you find papers online, how do you do search terms. So I was like very lucky in that sense that that was quite a big focus for my university, to try and increase that literacy of like finding and consuming content. But I suppose if I came at it at the kind of like right time, whereas if maybe that wasn't your experience, like you did have to physically get journals and stuff, and then you're then trying to transition into online content, you often you're kind of just left on your own, and you don't know how to maybe have the most effective search, and you could be looking for this, or you might even not know what kind of search engines for finding journals there are, for example. So there's that, and I think a lot of people can be left behind in that process. I mean, I've definitely found in my own lab, definitely like the PhD students, we kind of have to be the ones who are like, oh, we found this new piece of software that would be really good for the lab. We can store all of our data on this cloud system, or these are the kind of referencing managers out there, and we're kind of being like having to be the ones to raise it and like bring it forward. And I suppose depending on the environment you're in, people might be more receptive than others. Fortunately, people are very receptive in the people I've worked with. But yeah.
And Jess, you mentioned it as well in terms of how you consumed content throughout your research career.
So obviously when I first started my sort of towards the end of my undergrad, and I was doing my research project in my final year, I was still going to the library to look at papers. And then I've seen it over time where everything's gone digital. Even as I mentioned, like Google Reader, I think it was called. Even I can't even remember what it was now, but it was so good because I could just subscribe to the RSS feeds that I wanted and read the papers that I wanted to read and read the articles I wanted to see. And then that was sort of became defunct like halfway through my PhD. So there was a big scramble to like what the next thing was. Reference managers were a huge thing. That kind of developed as I was doing my PhD. So even how I wrote my thesis is probably different to how you guys are going to write yours. And it was 10 years ago I started my PhD. But I think Sean, you just made a really interesting point in that what I found throughout my career and how I was consuming content is that then the burden of education was on me to teach the people that were essentially responsible for my education, like our lecturers, my PI, like during my PhD and during my postdocs. The burden was on me to say this is how things are going moving forwards. For example, preprints are a thing that has become a thing during my time in research. And in my last postdoc, I literally gave a whole group meeting on preprints and what they were, how they worked, what the benefits of preprint publishing were. And they're so good for early career researchers. They're so good for students to like disseminate, get immediate feedback. Like it's, all of these things are so positive. And even the benefits for the PIs in terms of, they get to put their work out there early and put their stamp on a field and say, this is what I'm working on. I'm signposting the directions that I'm going, and take ownership of their avenue of research in that field. But I was doing an hour-long presentation in my group meeting to make the case to my PI that we should start using preprints. And there's such a burden of education on digital natives to teach the gatekeepers, as it were, in academia right now, because we rely on our PIs to, get the grant funding, to be the big name on the paper that will get published. But in reality, they're relying on us to educate them on how things are moving forwards. And so it's quite a challenge, I think, navigating the gap, and me being the researcher that was in the middle of the gap, if that made sense. So yeah, that was a big thing for me, I think.
So picking up on Jess's point around, so we're moving into publishing and digital natives. Audrey, how do you think publishing is changing because of technology?
Yeah, so since everything went digital, no one really picks up like a physical copy of a journal issue anymore, really. I still see copies around in libraries and in cafes and things like that, but we are more kind of geared towards searching for specific articles and pieces of information that is directly relevant to us. So I feel like search engines have become a big tool for researchers now to be able to just, use keywords to find exactly what they're looking for. And I think that there can be a lot of improvement in that sort of space as well, because a lot of the main sort of search engines that we rely on, like Google Scholar or PubMed, they will often just show up things that include the keywords that you specifically search for, whereas, you can easily imagine using AI machine learning technologies to allow researchers to just use natural language, which will then kind of bring up search results that will sort of be related to the thing that you're searching for, rather than have the direct words within it, in a way. So there are a few really early stage kind of apps and websites like illicit.org, which I tried the other day. I would say it's not that great yet, but there is potential to kind of develop these tools to just allow researchers to have access to everything, the huge body of publication that's out there. And also, there's so much data out there that we need a better way to be able to link different things together. So, rather than having to look through articles and clicking on who's cited what, if there was a big network of, within a certain field, just for researchers to be able to see what's been going on within a field of work, I think there's lots of opportunities within sort of data visualization and network mapping. So, I mean, things are happening. I think private companies and innovators are starting to come up with these, probably because they've been through being researchers and are thinking like a researcher. So,
Jess and I have got work to do. Yeah, really. I'm going to open up for a moment to questions, but Annabelle, how do you think, in terms of now you're looking to write your PhD and publish, how is digital going to impact what you're doing there?
I just want to touch what you said there about how I find papers. So again, I want to find them things that are directly related to what I'm studying. So I would go search on Google or different softwares, and one in particular is Discovery and Scholarcy, and I think they're under Cactus Communications, and they're very, very helpful. So researchers want to find relevant papers, and both of those tools, apps alone, have helped me guide and find new papers. There's time savers. Every researcher I know in my lab wants to save time. And these softwares allow us not only to find relevant papers, but also summarize what we're reading. And I know that's a massive part of being a researcher, being able to read exactly everything on the paper, but at the end of the day, researchers want to save time. So I find that a lot of the students that I'm collaborating with, they use these because they want to save time, and as a researcher, that's what we want. So I feel that if more time is focused on improving these apps and making them more available, and I know that a lot of them are paid, but if they're subscription based in universities, a lot more students would use them, and I think it's really, really handy.
Thanks everyone. I'm going to open up to questions. We've got some time. Any questions from the audience?
We've probably got time for maybe 2 questions before you do a closing statement. So I've got a roaming mic which I can wander around with. So if anyone does have a question.
Hi. Thank you. This has been incredibly interesting. I think what stood out to me, though, is that all of you, and apologies if I've got this wrong, kind of identify as digital natives. And we've talked a lot about the value of digital, and there's so much potential for what digital can add, and in diversity and inclusion, etc. But actually, I want to kind of flip that for a second and say the trajectory in publishing is very much towards basically 100% digital. You know, conversations are around like how can we get rid of print, but actually I know that I've had conversations with researchers where they actually really value that print component in certain circumstances. So medical staff who their like industry guidelines, for example, they like to have a printed copy. So if they've got a question, they can just grab it off their shelf rather than having to open up their laptop and go and find it, etc. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that as digital natives, as whether you see moving to a 100% digital environment as solely positive, or whether you think that we need to consider maybe those people or those circumstances where actually they're looking for that print component.
Anyone want to pick up on that?
I think there's, so talking from the sort of chemistry space and the chemistry perspective in publishing, from what I see, I think that in chemistry, everyone is very much ready to go fully digital. However, I do think that there is some space for almost less sort of, I mean, it's hard to explain. It's still like scholarly, so it's still, you know, review articles and things like that, but maybe in more of a magazine format, something that's a little bit more digestible and a little bit more accessible. I think there's still some kind of a drive for that in chemistry. I think there is still a thing that people want to still pick something up and read more widely and sort of outside of the narrow field that they've sort of tunneled themselves into. So whilst I do think that research will go all digital, and I think that there's no, to me, I don't see any other way of that going, I still think there's going to be some kind of niche avenue for somebody to pick up something that's a little bit more outside of their worldview, you know, just if they wanted to read a little bit more widely or learn something else. I think that's where this kind of magazine style of journal will come into play and become more popular, be seen as like a, you know, like a niche or a cool thing. Like, oh, did you read the latest article in XYZ? Like, you know, a little bit like a magazine, like a Vanity Fair or the New Yorker or something like that. I think there's an avenue for like a chemistry version of that. But that's just me. Yeah, but I don't think there's, I think it's just all going digital as far as I can see. I can't see any other way. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I see it going digital. I would 100% agree. I think the magazine concept is really cool, but I don't know if researchers in my area, like physics, bioinformatics, would, because we are always on our computers anyway, so yeah.
I'll go to the next question.
Yes, thank you so much. I really found it all very interesting, what you were adding. From the difference between print or digital, I would like to zoom in on the difference between text and non-text. You know, it always strikes me that you as the new generation do much more with audio, video, and maybe might get less interested in text, especially if it's long text. You know, all the chatting and sharing goes in very small snippets. How could that change scholarly communications?
I'm going to ask Audrey, because she'd mentioned about, you do work with video as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and I think, you know, more and more I'm seeing graphical abstracts and, you know, videos alongside published papers, and I think that definitely adds a component to the text part. I think text is important to communicate to people who are not, you know, directly sort of in the field, but I think younger generations are more holistic learners in a way, so different forms of media definitely helps. And then we were actually talking with Kaveh earlier about the value of non-text publishing, you know, changing the format of this traditional long text paper, and instead gearing it more towards publishing bits of data and bits of information, which then people can have a discussion around. So more of a open community of researchers that are able to publish their research kind of in real time, which, you know, the whole publication process is quite long and drawn out, you know, so going through writing a manuscript to getting it edited and then getting it reviewed and putting it out there is quite drawn out, which can slow down the progress of science as well. So I think it's good if we start to branch out and think about different ways of communicating this to a scientific and also a public audience.
I feel like this should be a whole conference in itself, right? completely unbiased. So one sentence each to finish up. We're sitting here in 20 years' time, and the whole industry is being completely disrupted. Academic publishing has been disrupted. What's your prediction? So, Shan, one thing.
I mean, I think probably everything will go more digital, but I think we'll probably diversify the forms of like digital content that's produced. Like, I'm starting to see more use of like social media. So I quite often find out about like articles that are published on Instagram, for example, and Twitter is also a really big active sphere for communicating articles that are being published. So and also with the kind of like rise of things like TikTok as well, science communicators are using that as like a very like short form content to really effectively get across quite complicated scientific ideas. But I think we'll probably see a rise in those kind of platforms being used. Thanks.
Annabelle?
Yeah, definitely through social media as well, but also for code. A lot of the times when I find papers, the associated code isn't attached to the paper, so using GitHub and open sources like that, having the code there, so when I see a paper I can find it, reproduce the exact same results that this author did, because a lot of the times journals don't require, they give the person the option to include the code, but having that there would be essential and complete game changer for computational biologists.
Thanks, Annabelle. Jess?
I think that to sort of bring together what everyone's been talking about, I think that the way that digital natives are going to sort of change things is speed. I think that the speed of how information is disseminated is going to change rapidly to the point of where I think everything's just going to be immediate. Like, the process of peer review is going to change, and the process of publishing full stop is just going to change to the point where I think that we're a generation that wants everything immediately and now, and I think that that's going to completely translate into the publishing realm, and I think that everyone's just going to have to steel themselves for some pretty big changes, because I think that researchers in the future are going to want to access everything immediately, and we're going to have to adapt to that, I think.
And Audrey?
I think digital transformation really has the potential to democratize science. With advances in open access, you no longer have to be in an ivory tower of academics, sort of to be able to take research forward. So I think that's going to be a big positive that we could push forward with digital technologies in publishing.
Thank you. And thank you. I'm really honoured. Four incredibly talented and inspiring early career researchers. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you everyone for listening.